Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We are here again in the Hawk T1 by Just Flight, a Microsoft Flight Simulator. And the airport we're getting airborne from is Southampton in the UK, ICAO Echo Golf Hotel India. This video is going to be all about military style circuits. You might call them patterns. If you're American, you might even call them overheads. In any case, we're going to fly a demo pattern here just as a look-see about what we're going to talk through for the next 5 to 10 minutes. Also remember, please hit that like button, even better hit the subscribe, help support the channel and stay up to date with any future video releases. So here we are in the cockpit of the first takeoff, runway 02. As a reminder, as you get to 90 knots, rotate the aircraft, and 120 is when we get airborne. So this pattern will be the demo pattern. The most important thing to take from this is just the cadence and when the turns and when the checks get done. So we're airborne, gear flap up. At 160 knots I'll reduce the power to 90%. I'm looking to achieve 190 knots by 500 feet. I'll check right at 400 feet and the 500 feet is the first turn as long as you have that minimum of 190 knots. Looking to roll out at 1,000 feet AGL. Now we're near the coast, so the runway is pretty much at sea level. If you're somewhere else, you need to adjust your AMSL or your altitude that you're flying downwind. So we're flying downwind. I'll be looking to the runway for reference. I'm using the course bar for my downwind reciprocal heading. And this is still wind, there's no wind today. I'll configure about 3/4 of the way down the runway. And then I'm looking at the threshold. If you can draw a diagonal line between the far top left and the near right lower piano keys, that'll give you a 45-degree reference, and this is where you'll tip final. Again, if you're American, I mean perch. Come back to this very important attitude in the next pattern. But I'm just holding this attitude all the way around the final turn. We can roll out around about 300 feet, around about 1 mile. And as the self debrief point, I don't account for the raised lighting, so I'm probably bumping the landing gear across the lights. But on the plus, this is probably one of my better landings. Okay, lower the nose slightly to accelerate. Full power, waiting 110 to 120 knots to get airborne. Gear flap. Once the aircraft is clean and we get 160 knots, I'll then bring the power back to 90%. So I'll just pull the throttle, I'll monitor the RPM as it decays to 90, and hopefully I can hold that. I'll keep 10 degrees nose up throughout this maneuver and throughout the upwind turn. The minimum, like I said, was 190 knots. If you're not accelerating quick enough, make sure you've got the power set and make sure the nose is low enough. 500 feet, rolling to the right. Important attitude. I'm holding for simplicity 10 degrees. The actual manual says you can adjust this to accelerate, etc. But I think the sim works well with 10 degrees nose up, and I'll bleed a little bit of speed in this upwind turn. Angle of bank is 50 degrees. Thereabouts. Do not let the nose drop at all, otherwise you'll stop climbing and you won't achieve 1,000 feet. Slight overbank to let the nose drop to about 4 to 5 degrees nose up, to hold my 1,000 feet and keep the turn coming. I'm slightly fast. The aim is to roll out here at 190 knots and set, the book says 78, but I find 80% RPM works well here. Of course, 200 knots is your gear flap limiting speed. Next important reference, you'll see the wingtip is just about to touch the runway. A good spacing reference is if your wingtip will drive down the runway, then that's good. If it's overlapping, you're probably a bit tight, and if there's space between the wingtip and the runway, then you're a bit wide. Here's the pre-landing checks 3/4 of the way down, and as soon as I lower gear and flap, I'll set the power to 85%. You want no less than 160 knots prior to tipping final, and as soon as you tip final, flap goes down, and this is the next critical attitude. So you want 45 degrees bank turn on the attitude indicator, and you can see that the manual compass on the 12 o'clock at the canopy bow is on the horizon. This will give you about a 5-degree nose down attitude, and you must hold this consistently each time. As you go round final, you're checking your speed and your altitude. You want no less than 140 knots prior to rolling out. I'll probably go a couple of knots slow, but nothing too bad. If you tip final in the right point, you can pretty much do this final turn just by reference to the instruments. If you've got track IR or VR, it's good to cross-reference with the runway. Short final, we're checking gears down, 3 greens, flaps down, and toes clear. And we should be 130 knots, decelerating down to our threshold speed. And at 500 kilos, that should be 115 knots. Again, I'm just going a little bit shallow, and a couple of knots slow. And I could have flared it off a little bit more. So lower the nose to accelerate the aircraft, don't let the nose wheel touch down. 110 knots, and off we go. For this pattern, we're going to look at more of the visual references that I use inside and out. Could look at Southampton. Must remember the Southampton scenery is by Orbex. It's fantastic scenery, I love it. Here we go, 400 feet. I'm going to look outside and check downwind to make sure the pattern's clear. 500 feet. That's my action point to roll. Then all I'm doing is staring at that attitude indicator. If you get a little bit of buffet in the background, that's okay. Just don't pull any harder than that. I do a better job of 190 knots on rollout. That worked out nicely. And now if you look front left of the aircraft, there's a square feature. It looks like it's got water in, but it dries up as we get closer. If you fly a lot of patterns at one particular airfield, you'll get to know these references. So each time I roll out, I want to be inside of that square feature just left of the nose. You'll notice the altimeter reads 0000. There's a small bug with it. It'll be fixed in the next update. Pre-landing checks. If you find yourself getting slow, even though you set 85% when you configure, just try configuring slightly later. And that speed 160 knots from final. I do lose a little bit of altitude, so remember to trim back as the speed decelerates. Flap down. Remember that attitude absolutely critical. If you find yourself overshooting by going through the centre line, then you're probably slightly tight at the perch or at the final tipping point. Again, 140 knots by rollout, now 130 knots decelerating to 115. Short final checks. You're looking to roll out with 4 reds, 1 white, and then that should go into 4 reds because you are landing before the pappies. I'll finish this video just by having a quick look at the external view of this amazing livery and that final turn. All these final turns have flown fairly close to the limits of the aircraft performance, so they need to be consistent. In future videos I'll talk about the effects of wind and how to overcome those. That livery is amazing. That's available on flightsim.to. The airport is Southampton by Orbex. If you're still watching, please hit that like, even better hit that subscribe, and until the next time, take care.